The summer of 1876 brought nothing but heartache to Katherine Collins as she stood at the bottom of the weathered wooden steps leading to Fairview's only doctor, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other gripping the handrail as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly, making the simple task of climbing 7 steps seem as impossible as scaling a mountain. Katherine's cotton dress clung to her damp skin, the threadbare fabric doing little to hide her 7-month pregnancy. Sweat trickled down her neck as she placed one foot on the first step, wincing at the sharp pain shooting across her lower back. 2 more steps and she was already breathless, her vision swimming with black spots. "Madam, you all right there?" The deep voice came from behind her, startling Katherine enough that she nearly lost her balance. She turned carefully, one hand still gripping the railing, to find herself staring at the broad chest of a man whose face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of a dusty brown hat. When he tilted his head, she caught sight of startlingly blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face that looked like it had seen its fair share of hardship. "I'm managing," Katherine lied, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. The stranger, a cowboy judging by his attire, frowned, taking in her pale face and trembling legs. Without another word, he stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal thick, wavy chestnut hair. "Quentin Lawson, madam, and with all due respect, you don't look like you're managing at all." His voice carried a hint of Texas beneath the concern. "May I?" He gestured toward the steps. Katherine hesitated. Since Thomas had died 3 months ago, leaving her alone with their unborn child and a mountain of debt, she'd been fiercely independent out of necessity. But today, with the summer heat sapping her strength and the baby kicking particularly hard, she found herself nodding. "Katherine Collins," she managed to say before Quentin stepped closer. With unexpected gentleness for a man his size, he slipped one arm behind her back and the other beneath her knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. Katherine let out a small gasp, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "I've got you, Mrs. Collins," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair as he carefully ascended the steps. "Been carrying calves heavier than you since I was 14. Despite everything, Katherine felt a smile tug at her lips. "I'm not certain that's a compliment, Mr. Lawson." His chest rumbled with a soft chuckle. "Not meant as one, madam, just a fact." He reached the top landing and paused. "Dr. Johnson's office, I presume," Katherine nodded, and Quentin pushed the door open with his boot, carrying her into the mercifully cooler interior of the doctor's office. The surprised face of Sarah, the doctor's wife who served as his assistant, greeted them. "Good heavens, Katherine, what happened?" Sarah rushed forward, concern etched across her kindly face. "Nothing happened," Katherine said quickly. The heat and the steps." "She was having trouble with the stairs," Quentin explained, still holding Katherine securely. "Seemed like she might faint." Sarah gestured to a chair. "Set her down there, please. I'll fetch some water." Quentin lowered Katherine gently into the offered chair, his hands lingering just a moment longer than necessary, as if ensuring she was truly secure before letting go. The absence of his support left Katherine feeling strangely bereft. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," she said, smoothing her dress over her belly. He replaced his hat, nodding respectfully. "Madam." He turned to leave but hesitated at the door. "Will you be needing help getting home after?" The offer caught Katherine by surprise. Since Thomas's death, few people had offered genuine help without expecting something in return. She'd learned to be wary of men's offers in particular. "I'll be fine," she answered automatically, even as she wondered how she would manage the walk back to her small cabin on the edge of town. Something in Quentin's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he merely nodded again. "As you wish, Mrs. Collins." He tipped his hat and stepped out, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Sarah returned with water, placing a cool hand on Katherine's forehead. That was Quentin Lawson. Works at the Blackwater Ranch about 10 miles out. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's got a reputation as an honest man. Katherine sipped the water, her mind still on the strong arms that had carried her so effortlessly. "I've never seen him before. He comes to town about once a month for supplies. Lost his wife and child in childbirth about 4 years ago. Hasn't been the same since, they say." The information settled in Katherine's chest like a weight. She knew all too well how grief could hollow a person from the inside out. Perhaps that explained the shadows she'd glimpsed behind those blue eyes. Dr. Johnson appeared then, ending further conversation about Quentin Lawson. But even as Katherine answered the doctor's questions about her pregnancy, a small part of her mind kept returning to the cowboy with the gentle hands and sad eyes. The examination revealed nothing concerning just the expected discomforts of carrying a child during an Arizona summer. When Katherine emerged from the doctor's office an hour later, she was surprised to find Quentin Lawson sitting on the porch steps, whittling a small piece of wood with a pocket knife. He stood quickly when she appeared, pocketing both the knife and the half-formed carving. "Mrs. Collins," he greeted her, his voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Lawson," she returned. "You didn't need to wait. Figured you might need help getting back home." He shrugged as if it was the most natural thing in the world to wait an hour for a woman he'd just met. Katherine hesitated. Her legs still felt weak, and the thought of walking the half-mile to her cabin in the afternoon heat was daunting. Still, she'd learned to be cautious. "I don't wish to inconvenience you further." "No inconvenience, madam. My business in town is done, and my horse could use the exercise." He gestured to where a handsome chestnut gelding was hitched to a post across the street. Something in his straightforward manner reassured Katherine. This wasn't a man with ulterior motives, just one offering help when it was needed. "Then I would be grateful for the assistance, Mr. Lawson." He nodded, offering his arm for support as they descended the steps together. Katherine was acutely aware of his solid presence beside her, steady as the mountains that ringed the valley. When they reached his horse, Quentin made a stirrup with his hands. "If you'll allow me, Mrs. Collins." Katherine placed her hand on his shoulder for balance and let him boost her up onto the saddle. Once she was settled, he untied the horse and began leading it by the reins, walking alongside rather than mounting behind her. "You don't have to walk, Mr. Lawson," Katherine said, feeling guilty as she watched him stride through the dust. "Dakota doesn't mind carrying just one," he replied. "Besides, it's only proper." They moved through town at a leisurely pace, drawing curious glances from the few people braving the afternoon heat. Katherine directed him toward the eastern edge of town, where her small cabin sat on a modest plot of land that Thomas had purchased with dreams of someday expanding into a proper ranch. "It's not much," she said as the cabin came into view, suddenly self-conscious of its weathered appearance and the garden that was fighting a losing battle against the summer heat. "Looks like a home," Quentin replied simply, and something in his tone made Katherine look at him more closely. His expression was unreadable, but there was no judgment in his eyes. When they reached the cabin, Quentin helped Katherine dismount with the same careful attention he'd shown earlier. Her feet had barely touched the ground when the baby gave a forceful kick, making her gasp and press a hand to her side. Quentin's brow furrowed with concern. "Everything all right?" Katherine nodded, a small smile playing on her lips despite her discomfort. "Just someone letting me know they're there. This little one has quite a kick." A shadow passed over Quentin's features so quickly Katherine almost missed it. "When are you due?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. October, the doctor believes. Katherine moved toward her porch, noticing with dismay that one of the steps had further splintered since morning. She'd been meaning to fix it, but between her condition and lack of proper tools, it had been impossible. Quentin noticed her hesitation. That step needs replacing before it gives way entirely. Yes, it's been on my list of things to address, Katherine said, carefully navigating around the damaged board. Quentin was silent for a moment then. I could fix it for you. I've got the tools on my ranch. Katherine turned to him in surprise. That's very kind, but I couldn't ask that of you. You didn't ask. I offered. His directness was refreshing in a town where most offers came with strings attached. I can come back tomorrow with what's needed. Katherine wanted to refuse out of pride, but practicality won out. The step was dangerous and she couldn't risk a fall in her condition. If you're certain it's no trouble. No trouble, he confirmed. I'll be by mid-morning if that suits. That would be fine, Mr. Lawson. And thank you for everything today. He tipped his hat. Mrs. Collins. With that, he mounted his horse and turned back toward town, leaving Katherine standing on her porch, watching until he disappeared from view. Inside her cabin, Katherine sank into her one comfortable chair, her mind replaying the events of the day. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had accepted help without feeling diminished by it. There was something about Quentin Lawson that inspired trust, perhaps the quiet dignity he carried, or the way his actions spoke louder than his few words. As the evening shadows lengthened across her small home, Katherine found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt in months. It was just a porch step being fixed, she told herself. Nothing more. But even as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help but remember the feeling of being carried in those strong arms, safe for a brief moment from the burdens she'd been carrying alone. True to his word, Quentin Lawson appeared the next morning, his wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and what appeared to be a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Katherine had been up since dawn, tidying the cabin and making herself presentable despite telling herself it didn't matter what a stranger thought of her home or appearance. She stepped onto the porch as he approached, one hand shielding her eyes from the morning sun. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson." "Mrs. Collins," he greeted, bringing the wagon to a stop. "Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all. I've been up for hours." It was easier to rise early these days when the baby seemed determined to use her ribs as a percussion instrument. Quentin nodded, climbing down from the wagon. He was dressed much the same as yesterday, though his shirt looked fresher. His sleeves were already rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. "Brought some breakfast," he said, gesturing to the basket. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house packed it. Said pregnant ladies need proper feeding." Katherine felt her cheeks warm, touched by the thoughtfulness and slightly embarrassed by the implication that she might not be eating adequately. Which, if she were honest, she wasn't always, not with funds being so tight. "That's very kind, thank you." She descended the steps carefully, avoiding the damaged one. "Would you like coffee? I just made a pot." "Wouldn't turn it down," he replied, lifting the basket and following her into the cabin. Katherine was hyper-aware of Quentin's presence as he ducked through the doorway into her modest home. The cabin consisted of just 2 rooms, the main living area with a small kitchen and sitting space, and a bedroom at the back. Everything was clean but worn, evidence of careful maintenance with limited resources. "Please sit," she offered, gesturing to the small table as she moved to pour coffee. Quentin set the basket down and removed his hat, revealing hair that looked like it had been recently combed. He sat at the table, his large frame making the chair seem almost child-sized. "Sugar?" Katherine asked, placing a steaming cup before him. "No, thank you. Black is fine." She nodded, pouring her own cup before sitting across from him. There was an awkward moment of silence before Quentin reached for the basket. Mrs. Peterson sent biscuits, preserves, and some bacon. He unwrapped the contents, setting them on the table. Said to make sure you ate. Katherine smiled despite herself. Mrs. Peterson has appointed herself guardian of every widow and orphan in Fairview. Seems like a good woman, Quentin commented, pushing the plate of biscuits toward her. She is, Katherine agreed, taking one to be polite, though her appetite had been unreliable lately. Her husband was the sheriff before he was killed in a robbery 2 years ago. Quentin nodded solemnly. This town's seen its share of loss. It has. Katherine's hand unconsciously moved to her wedding band, a simple gold circle that now hung loosely on her finger as her pregnancy had caused her hands to swell and then shrink again. Quentin noticed the gesture but didn't comment. Instead, he spread some preserves on a biscuit and handed it to her, his expression making it clear he expected her to eat it. Katherine accepted with a small smile, taking a bite. The sweet tartness of the raspberry preserves was better than she'd expected, and she realized she was actually hungry. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Katherine's curiosity got the better of her. "How long have you been at Blackwater Ranch, Mr. Lawson?" "Going on 6 years now." He took a sip of coffee. "Came west from Texas in '70, worked a few ranches before buying my own place." "And you run it alone?" Katherine asked, remembering what Sarah had said about his lost family. A shadow crossed his face. "Got 3 hands that help with the cattle, but the house is just me." Katherine nodded, understanding all too well the emptiness of a home meant for a family but occupied by just one. It must be a good-sized operation if you have hired hands. "Modest," he corrected. 50 head of cattle, some horses, enough to keep me busy." He finished his coffee and stood. "Should get to that step before the day gets too hot." Katherine rose as well, somewhat relieved at the change of subject. "Of course. Please let me know if you need anything." Quentin spent the next hour not just repairing the broken step, but replacing all 3 porch steps with fresh lumber. Katherine watched from the doorway as he worked efficiently, measuring twice before making any cut, his movements precise despite his large hands. When he finally stood back to survey his work, sweat dampening his shirt despite the morning hour, Katherine stepped out with a dipper of water from the well. "It looks wonderful," she said, offering him the water. "Better than it ever did, in fact." Quentin accepted the dipper, drinking deeply before responding. "Should last you a good while now. Treated this lumber myself before bringing it." Katherine was touched by the extra consideration. "You didn't have to go to such trouble," he shrugged. "No trouble." He looked around the property, his gaze assessing. "Your garden could use some attention," Katherine sighed. "Yes, I haven't been able to keep up with it as I should. The weeds seem to grow faster than anything I plant." "I could help with that too if you'd allow it." Katherine hesitated. "Mr. Lawson, while I appreciate your kindness, I can't accept charity." "Not charity," he countered. "Just being neighborly. We're hardly neighbors with you 10 miles out." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Closer than my nearest ranch neighbor at 20 miles. Katherine couldn't help but smile in return. "Even so, I can't let you work for nothing. I may not have much money, but I can cook. If you're going to help with my garden, the least I can do is provide you with a proper meal." Quentin considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That seems fair." And so began an unexpected arrangement. Every few days, Quentin would ride to Katherine's cabin in the early morning and work on whatever needed attention, weeding the garden, mending the roof, chopping firewood for the coming winter. Katherine, in turn, would prepare a meal that they would share before he headed back to his ranch. Their conversations during these meals gradually deepened from polite small talk to to more meaningful exchanges. Katherine learned that Quentin had grown up on a cattle ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. He'd fought briefly for the Confederacy, more out of family expectation than conviction, and had come west afterward to escape the memories of a war he'd never believed in. In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a schoolteacher who had instilled in her a love of books. She'd met Thomas, a dreamer with plans to make his fortune in the West, at a church social. They'd married young and headed west with little more than hope, and Thomas's unshakable belief that Arizona territory held their future. "He was building us a life," Katherine said one evening in early August as they sat on her newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. The fever took him so quickly, 3 days from the first symptoms to the end. Quentin was silent for a long moment. "My wife, Abigail," he said finally, his voice low, "she was fine right up until the birth. Then there was bleeding they couldn't stop." He stared out at the horizon. "Lost her and our son within an hour of each other." Katherine's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Quentin." Somewhere along the way they'd shifted to first names, the formality between them dissolving with each shared meal and conversation. "Been 4 years," he said. "Some days it feels like yesterday, other days, like it happened to someone else entirely." "Yes," Katherine agreed softly. "That's exactly how it feels." Their eyes met in the fading light, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Katherine was the first to look away, her hand moving to her belly as the baby shifted. "Active tonight?" Quentin asked. Katherine nodded. "I think this one might be a dancer, never seems to rest." Quentin smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "My mother used to say that babies who move a lot in the womb are born curious about the world." "I hope so," Katherine said, her voice wistful. "I want this child to have curiosity, adventure, all the things Thomas and I dreamed of." "They will," Quentin assured her. "With you as their mother, how could they not?" The simple confidence in his voice warmed Katherine more than she cared to admit. As twilight deepened into night, she found herself reluctant to end the evening, to watch him ride away as he always did. But eventually, Quentin stood, stretching his tall frame. "Should get back before it's fully dark." Katherine nodded, rising awkwardly from her chair. At nearly 8 months pregnant, every movement was becoming more cumbersome. Quentin's hand shot out to steady her elbow, his touch light but secure. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. "Katherine," he began, then stopped, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Yes." She prompted when he didn't continue. He seemed to come to some decision. "The Founders' Day celebration is next Saturday in town. Would you consider attending with me?" The invitation caught Katherine by surprise. She hadn't attended any social function since Thomas's death, partly out of mourning and partly because facing the town's pitying looks had been more than she could bear. "As friends," Quentin added quickly when she didn't immediately respond. "Just thought you might enjoy the music, the company." Katherine found herself nodding before she'd fully considered it. "Yes, I'd like that." The smile that spread across Quentin's face was worth any potential discomfort the event might bring. "Good, that's good. I'll come by around noon if that suits." "It does," Katherine confirmed, her own smile forming in response to his evident pleasure. Quentin squeezed her elbow gently before releasing it. "Until Saturday, then." Katherine watched him mount his horse and ride away, her hand absently stroking her belly as the baby kicked enthusiastically, as if approving of her decision. "It's just an afternoon in town," she told herself aloud. "Nothing more." But as she prepared for bed that night, Katherine couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with the child she carried, and everything to do with the thought of spending an afternoon in Quentin Lawson's company. The Founders' Day celebration was Fairview's largest annual event, commemorating the establishment of the town in 1865. Despite its relatively short history, the citizens of Fairview embraced the opportunity for festivity with enthusiasm, decorating the town square with bunting and setting up tables laden with food. Katherine spent the morning of the celebration fussing over her appearance more than she had in months. Her wardrobe options were limited. Few of her dresses still accommodated her expanded waistline, but she had one blue cotton dress that Thomas had always favored. She'd let out the seams twice during her pregnancy, and while it was far from fashionable, it was clean and presentable. She was pinning her hair up when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. A glance out the window confirmed Quentin's arrival, right at noon as promised. He'd brought his wagon rather than riding horseback, a consideration for her comfort that didn't go unnoticed. Katherine took a final look in the small mirror hanging by her door. Her cheeks had more color than usual, either from excitement or the summer heat. With a deep breath, she stepped outside to greet her escort. Quentin had dressed for the occasion as well. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be a new hat. He'd even polished his boots to a respectable shine. "Katherine," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You look lovely." She smiled, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Lawson." A grin tugged at his mouth. "Back to Mr. Lawson, are we?" "Only when you're being formal," she returned, accepting his help into the wagon. The ride to town was pleasant, filled with easy conversation about the weather and the crops and nothing of consequence. Yet Katherine found herself more relaxed than she'd been in public since Thomas's death. Quentin's solid presence beside her was reassuring, a buffer against the curious looks she knew they would receive. Fairview was transformed when they arrived. Colorful bunting hung between buildings, and tables had been set up in the town square. A small band was playing near the newly constructed gazebo, and children darted between groups of adults, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. Quentin helped Katherine down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Would you like to sit in the shade? Or are you hungry?" "Shade first, I think," Katherine decided, already feeling the heat despite the relatively early hour. Quentin nodded, offering his arm, which she took without hesitation. Together, they made their way to a spot beneath a large oak tree where several benches had been placed. Katherine was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed them, but Quentin seemed oblivious or perhaps just unconcerned. "Katherine, how wonderful to see you out, Mrs. Peterson called, approaching with a wide smile. The boarding house owner carried a plate of cookies which she extended toward them. "And Mr. Lawson, what a pleasant surprise." "Mrs. Peterson," Quentin greeted her, taking a cookie with a polite nod. "Katherine, dear, you're positively glowing," Mrs. Peterson continued, her eyes twinkling as she glanced between them. "Pregnancy agrees with you." "Thank you," Katherine replied, accepting a cookie of her own. "Your boarders must be missing your baking today." "Oh, they'll survive on plain fare for one afternoon." Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I must say, you two make a handsome couple." Before Katherine could correct the assumption, Dr. Johnson approached, saving her from what would surely have been an awkward explanation. "Mrs. Collins, good to see you looking well," the doctor said. "And Mr. Lawson, I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Dr. Robert Johnson." The men shook hands, sizing each other up in that way men often did. Katherine watched with interest as Quentin seemed to pass whatever silent assessment the doctor was making. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Collins?" Dr. Johnson asked, his professional demeanor taking over. "Any concerns since I saw you last?" "None at all," Katherine assured him. "Just the usual discomforts." "Good, good. And you're taking it easy, I hope, not overdoing things," Quentin answered before Katherine could. "I've been helping with the heavier work around her place," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, "making sure she doesn't strain herself." "Doctor." Johnson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded approvingly. "Excellent. It's good she has support." He patted Katherine's arm. "Don't hesitate to send for me if anything changes. I'll be at the celebration all day." As the doctor moved on to greet other townspeople, Katherine turned to Quentin with an amused expression. "You've appointed yourself my guardian, it seems." "Just stating facts," he replied, though a hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "Would you like some lemonade? I see Mrs. Harper has set up her usual stand." The afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of conversations, music, and more food than Katherine had seen in one place since arriving in Arizona territory. Throughout it all, Quentin remained by her side, attentive without being overbearing, making sure she had shade and rest when needed. As the day progressed, Katherine noticed a subtle shift in the way the townspeople regarded them. The initial curiosity gave way to something like acceptance, as if seeing them together somehow made sense in a way that hadn't been apparent before. When the band began playing a slower tune, Quentin turned to Katherine with an unexpected question. "Would you care to dance?" Katherine hesitated. "I'm not sure I should in my condition." "Not a proper dance," he clarified. "Just standing together moving a little. If you'd rather not." "No," Katherine interrupted, surprising herself with her eagerness. "I'd like that." Quentin led her to the edge of the area where other couples were dancing, positioning himself so that she was partially shielded from view. With gentle hands, he drew her as close as her belly would allow, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They barely moved, just swaying slightly to the music, but Katherine felt a rush of emotions she hadn't experienced in months, the simple pleasure of being held, of sharing something as ordinary as a dance. "This is nice," she murmured, looking up to find Quentin watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Yes," he agreed, his voice deeper than usual. "It is." The music continued, but neither of them seemed to hear it anymore. Katherine was acutely aware of Quentin's hand at her waist, warm and steady, of the way his eyes never left her face, as if memorizing every detail. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick, breaking the spell between them. Katherine gasped, her free hand going to her side. "All right," Quentin asked immediately, concern replacing the previous warmth in his expression. Katherine laughed softly. "Yes, just someone reminding us they're here too." To her surprise, Quentin smiled. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering near her belly. No one but the doctor had touched her pregnancy since Thomas died. The request was intimate in a way that should have made her uncomfortable, yet Katherine found herself nodding. Gently, Quentin placed his large hand against the swell of her belly, just where the baby had been kicking. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, as if responding to the newcomer, the baby kicked again, right against his palm. Quentin's face transformed with wonder, his eyes widening. "That's something," he breathed. "They're strong," Katherine said, watching his reaction with a strange tightness in her chest. "Like their father." Something flickered in Quentin's eyes, a shadow of something she couldn't quite name, before he carefully removed his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for sharing that." The moment felt significant, though Katherine couldn't have explained why. As the music ended, Quentin stepped back, creating a proper distance between them once more. "Would you like to sit again?" he asked. "You've been on your feet a while." Katherine nodded, suddenly feeling the fatigue of the day catching up with her. Quentin guided her back to the bench beneath the oak tree, his hand at the small of her back. As the celebration continued around them, Katherine found herself studying Quentin's profile as he watched the townspeople. There was a quietness to him that she'd initially mistaken for aloofness, but now recognized as careful observation. He noticed things the way her hand occasionally rubbed her lower back, the subtle shift in her expression when the baby moved, the moment her energy began to flag. "I should take you home soon," he said, turning to catch her watching him. "You're tired, a little," she admitted, "but I've enjoyed today more than I expected to." "As have I." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we could do it again sometime, not a celebration, just an afternoon in town." The invitation hung between them, weighted with potential. Katherine knew what accepting might suggest, that this was more than friendship, more than a neighborly arrangement. The thought should have frightened her, should have felt like a betrayal of Thomas. Instead, it felt like possibility. "I'd like that," she said finally. The smile that crossed Quentin's face was worth any uncertainty. "Good, that's good." As they made their way back to the wagon, Katherine was aware of Mrs. Peterson watching them with undisguised approval. There would be talk, she knew. In a town the size of Fairview, her appearance at the celebration with Quentin would fuel gossip for weeks. Strangely, Katherine found she didn't mind. Let them talk. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something other than grief and worry. It might not be happiness yet, but it was a step in that direction. The wagon ride home was quieter than the journey into town, a comfortable silence settling between them as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. When they reached Katherine's cabin, Quentin helped her down with the same care he always showed, his hands strong and steady. "Thank you for today," Katherine said as they stood facing each other in the fading light. "I hadn't realized how much I needed to be among people again." "Thank you for agreeing to come," Quentin returned. "It was better having you there." There was an awkward moment where neither seemed to know how to end the day. Finally, Quentin cleared his throat. "I should let you rest. But I'll be by Tuesday to check on that loose board in your roof, if that's all right." "More than all right," Katherine assured him. "I'll make stew." He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Something to look forward to then. As he turned to go, Katherine impulsively reached out, touching his arm. "Quentin." He looked back, a question in his eyes. "I'm glad you were there that day," she said softly. "At the doctor's office. I'm glad it was you who helped me up those steps." Quentin's expression softened, his eyes warm in the twilight. "So am I, Katherine, so am I." She watched him drive away, one hand resting on her belly where the baby had settled into quieter movements. For the first time in months, the future didn't seem quite so daunting. The weeks that followed the Founders' Day celebration brought subtle but significant changes to Katherine's life. Quentin's visits, once every few days, became daily occurrences. He would arrive in the early morning, work on whatever needed attention around her property, and stay for a meal before returning to his own ranch. The townspeople, as Katherine had predicted, noticed the developing relationship. Some, like Mrs. Peterson, were openly supportive. Others were more reserved in their judgment, watching with curious eyes whenever Katherine and Quentin were seen together in town. Sarah Johnson, the doctor's wife, pulled Katherine aside after a checkup in late August. "You seem happier," she observed, her kind eyes studying Katherine's face. "Quentin Lawson is a good man." "We're friends," Katherine replied automatically, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't quite the truth anymore. What existed between them had evolved into something more complex, though neither had put a name to it yet. Sarah smiled knowingly. "Of course." Still, it's good to see color in your cheeks again. And there was color not just from the summer heat or the exertion of carrying a child, but from the warmth that seemed to spread through Katherine whenever Quentin was near. It was unexpected, this gradual awakening of feelings she'd thought buried with Thomas. Guilt accompanied these feelings sometimes, usually in the quiet hours of night when Katherine lay alone with her thoughts. Was it disloyal to Thomas's memory to find comfort in another man's company? To look forward to Quentin's arrival each morning with an anticipation that made her heart beat faster. But as her pregnancy progressed and her due date approached, Katherine found herself increasingly grateful for Quentin's steady presence. He never pressed for definitions or declarations, seemed content to simply be there, helping where he could, asking nothing in return except her company. One evening in early September, as they sat on Katherine's porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Quentin broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the baby comes?" Katherine turned to look at him, surprised by the query. "Do, with the cabin, the land," he clarified. "Running this place alone with a newborn won't be easy." It was something Katherine had been avoiding thinking about, though the reality loomed closer each day. Thomas had left enough money to cover immediate expenses, but not much beyond that. The small garden provided some food, but not enough to sustain her through the winter, especially with a baby to care for. "I've been considering my options," she said carefully. "I could sell, move back east to my family." The thought held little appeal. Her parents had made their disapproval clear when she'd married Thomas, a man they considered beneath her station. Returning as a widow with a child would mean living under their judgment and control. Quentin was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the horizon. "Or you could stay." "Staying means finding a way to support myself and the baby," Katherine pointed out. "I could perhaps teach, if the town ever builds the school they've been discussing." Quentin shifted in his chair, an unusual restlessness coming over him. "Katherine," he began, then stopped, as if gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about this for a while now." Something in his tone made Katherine's heart beat faster. "Yes, my place. It's bigger than I need. The house has 4 bedrooms, land enough for cattle and crops." He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "What I'm trying to say is, there's room there, for you, for the baby." Katherine stared at him, not quite comprehending what he was suggesting. "Quentin, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he hurried to add. "You'd have your own space, your own privacy. I thought it might be a solution, for the winter at least, until you decide what you want to do long term." The offer hung between them, fraught with unspoken implications. Katherine's mind raced, considering what he was really asking and what he wasn't. "People would talk," she said finally, the weakest of her many concerns but the easiest to voice. Quentin's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "People already talk. It wouldn't be proper," she continued, though the argument sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No," he agreed. "It wouldn't." He turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it, unless there was a reason for it to be proper. Katherine's breath caught. "Quentin, are you?" "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly. "Not yet. That wouldn't be fair to either of us, but I am asking you to consider it as a possibility, for the future." The honesty in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a proposal driven by pity or convenience. It was something else entirely, the careful hope of a man who had lost everything once and was cautious about reaching for happiness again. "I don't know what to say," Katherine admitted, her hand moving to her belly where the baby had begun its evening acrobatics. "You don't need to say anything right now," Quentin assured her. "Just think about it. about what's best for you and the little one." Katherine nodded, her emotions too tangled to form a coherent response. Part of her wanted to accept immediately the practical part that understood the challenges of raising a child alone on a remote homestead. But another part hesitated, uncertain if what she felt for Quentin was enough to build a life upon, or merely gratitude and the natural affection that comes from shared experience. "I will think about it," she promised. Quentin seemed satisfied with that, rising from his chair with a nod. "That's all I ask." He gathered his hat, preparing to leave as he always did before full dark. "I'll be by tomorrow to finish that windmill repair." "Quentin," Katherine called as he reached the steps. When he turned back, she offered him a small smile. "Thank you for everything." He tipped his hat, his eyes warm in the fading light. "See you tomorrow, Katherine." That night, as Katherine lay in bed feeling her child move beneath her hands, she allowed herself to imagine what life might be like at Blackwater Ranch. She'd seen it only once, when Quentin had brought her to pick up some tools he needed for a repair. It was larger than her modest cabin, sturdily built with a wide porch and rooms that caught the morning light. The land around it was good, better than her own plot, with a creek running through it and pastures that stayed green longer into the summer. It would be a good place to raise a child, she had to admit. And Quentin would be a good father. She'd seen how he was with the Johnson children when they encountered them in town, patient, kind, with that same quiet steadiness he showed in everything. But marriage. The thought still gave her pause. She had loved Thomas deeply, had built her future around his dreams. His death had shattered that future, leaving her to reassemble the pieces into something new. Was she ready to entrust those pieces to someone else? The baby kicked particularly hard, as if registering an opinion on the matter. Katherine smiled into the darkness, her hand rubbing the spot. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Should we take a chance?" The only answer was another kick, which Katherine chose to interpret as encouragement. Eventually, she drifted to sleep, her dreams filled with images of a house on a hill, a child running through tall grass, and Quentin watching them both with that quiet smile that reached all the way to his eyes. September brought cooler mornings and the first hints that summer's grip on the land was loosening. Katherine's body, heavy with child, welcomed the respite from the heat. She was in her final month of pregnancy, her movements slower, her need for rest greater. Quentin had taken to bringing his work to her cabin rather than completing it at his ranch, and then visiting. He would arrive early, settle at her table with his ledgers or correspondence, and work quietly while Katherine went about her day. It was a domestic arrangement that felt surprisingly natural, as if they'd been sharing space for years rather than weeks. They hadn't spoken again of his offer since that evening on the porch, but it remained between them, unacknowledged yet ever present. Katherine caught Quentin watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression a mixture of concern and something deeper that made her heart flutter. One morning in mid-September, Katherine awoke to a persistent ache in her lower back. She'd been experiencing discomfort for days, an expected part of late pregnancy. Dr. Johnson had assured her, but this was different. More focused, more rhythmic. She went about her morning routine as best she could, moving carefully as she prepared breakfast. When Quentin arrived, his keen eyes immediately noticed her discomfort. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down the basket of fresh eggs he'd brought from his chicken coop. "Just back pain," Katherine assured him, though she paused to press a hand against the kitchen counter as a particularly sharp twinge radiated around to her abdomen. "The doctor said it's normal at this stage." Quentin frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Maybe I should fetch Dr. Johnson, just to be sure." "Don't be silly," Katherine chided gently. He's busy enough without checking on every ache and pain. The baby isn't due for at least 2 more weeks. Reluctantly, Quentin agreed to wait, though he insisted Katherine rest while he took over the breakfast preparations. It was a domestic scene that might have been comical, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy carefully flipping hot cakes on her small stove, if Katherine hadn't been so distracted by the increasing frequency of the pains. By mid-morning, she could no longer deny what was happening. When Quentin found her bracing herself against the bedroom doorframe, breathing heavily through what was unmistakably a contraction, his face paled beneath his tan. "The baby's coming," Katherine confirmed before he could ask. "I need the doctor." Quentin was already moving, grabbing his hat. "I'll bring him back as fast as I can. Will you be all right alone?" Katherine nodded, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "Yes, first babies take time. Just hurry." He hesitated at the door, clearly torn about leaving her. "Katherine." "Go," she urged, managing a smile despite another contraction building. "I'll be fine." With a final worried glance, Quentin departed, the sound of his horse's hooves fading rapidly as he pushed the animal to a gallop. Alone, Katherine allowed herself to acknowledge the fear that had been building alongside the contractions. This wasn't how she'd imagined bringing her child into the world without Thomas, in a cabin miles from town, with only the hurried assistance of a doctor who might not arrive in time. But as she moved slowly around the cabin, gathering clean linens and heating water as she'd been instructed to do, Katherine found strength in the thought of Quentin racing to bring help. She wasn't truly alone anymore. That knowledge carried her through the next hour as the contractions intensified, becoming more frequent and more demanding. She was kneeling beside her bed, gripping the frame during a particularly strong contraction, when she heard the wagon approaching. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by embarrassment at being found in such a vulnerable position. The door flew open, and Quentin burst in, Dr. Johnson close behind him. The concern on Quentin's face when he saw her turned quickly to alarm. "Katherine." He was beside her in an instant, one strong arm supporting her back. "What can I do?" Dr. Johnson intervened before she could answer. "Help her onto the bed, Mr. Lawson. Then I'll need you to wait outside." Quentin's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, gently lifting Katherine and placing her on the bed. His hands lingered on her arms, his eyes seeking hers. "I'll be right outside if you need anything. Anything at all." Katherine nodded, a rush of emotion making it difficult to speak. Another contraction seized her before she could respond, and Dr. Johnson was already rolling up his sleeves, his professional demeanor taking over. "Mr. Lawson," the doctor said firmly, "outside, please." With evident reluctance, Quentin left the room. Katherine heard the front door open and close as he stepped onto the porch, imagining him pacing the length of it, his worry a tangible presence even through the walls that separated them. What followed was the most challenging and extraordinary experience of Katherine's life. Labor was everything she'd been told to expect and nothing like she'd imagined. The pain was immense, seeming to consume her entire being at times, yet strangely distant at others, as if happening to someone else. Dr. Johnson was calm and competent, guiding her through each stage with quiet authority. Sarah arrived sometime in the afternoon, having been collected by Quentin on his way back with the doctor. Her presence was a comfort, her cool hands on Katherine's forehead and her steady voice providing encouragement when Katherine felt she couldn't continue. Through it all, Katherine was aware of Quentin's presence outside, a sentinel keeping watch. Occasionally, she would hear his boots on the porch steps as he paced, or his voice asking Sarah quiet questions when she emerged briefly for fresh water or linens. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, Katherine's labor intensified. The time for pushing had come, and with it, a renewed determination. This child, Thomas's child, their dream made flesh, was almost here. "You're doing wonderfully," Sarah encouraged, wiping Catherine's brow with a cool cloth. "Just a little more." Katherine gathered her remaining strength, focusing on the doctor's instructions and the thought of finally holding her baby. With a primal cry that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself, she gave one final, powerful push. And then, like a miracle breaking through the pain and exhaustion, came the sound she'd been waiting 9 months to hear, the indignant, powerful wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "A daughter, Doctor," Johnson announced, his professional demeanor softening as he placed the squirming, red-faced infant on Catherine's chest. "A healthy baby girl." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she gazed at her daughter for the first time. Tiny fists waved in protest at this cold, bright world, but gradually settled as Katherine drew her closer, marveling at the perfect miniature features. "Hello," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Hello, my darling girl." Time seemed to stand still as Katherine memorized every detail of her daughter's face: the bow-shaped mouth, the wisp of dark hair, the long lashes resting against flushed cheeks. This was Thomas's daughter, his legacy. But as Katherine studied the tiny face, she saw herself there too, in the shape of the eyes and the determined set of the chin. Sarah helped clean and swaddle the baby while Dr. Johnson attended to Katherine. When everything was settled, Sarah asked the question Katherine had been too absorbed to consider. "Shall I tell Mr. Lawson he can come in now? The poor man has been wearing a path in your porch boards." Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, please." Moments later, Quentin appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his expression a mixture of concern and uncertainty. When his eyes fell on Katherine and the bundle in her arms, something in his face transformed, a softening, an opening. "Katherine," he breathed, taking a tentative step into the room. "You're all right, we both are," she confirmed, adjusting the blanket to give him a better view of the baby's face. "Come meet my daughter." Quentin approached the bed slowly, as if afraid his presence might somehow disturb the peaceful tableau. When he reached Katherine's side, he knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the newborn. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice hushed with wonder. "Just like her mother." Katherine felt a fresh wave of tears at the sincerity in his words. "Would you like to hold her?" Surprise flickered across Quentin's face, followed by something that looked almost like fear. "I don't know if I should. It's been a long time since I held a baby." "It's like riding a horse, Doctor." Johnson interjected from where he was packing his bag. "You never really forget." With gentle guidance from Katherine, Quentin carefully took the tiny bundle, his large hands enveloping the swaddled infant with surprising tenderness. The contrast between his weathered, work-hardened hands and the baby's delicate features was striking and oddly right, as if those hands had been waiting to cradle something so precious. "What's her name?" Quentin asked, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. Katherine had considered many names during her pregnancy, always imagining discussing the final choice with Thomas. In his absence, she'd settled on a name that honored both her husband and her own father. "Thomasina," she said. "Thomasina Elizabeth Collins, but I think I'll call her Eliza." Quentin nodded, a smile touching his lips. "Eliza, it suits her." Dr. Johnson cleared his throat, breaking the moment between them. "I need to head back to town, but I'll return tomorrow to check on both of you. Mrs. Collins needs rest now, as much as possible." "I'll stay," Quentin said immediately, looking up at the doctor with an expression that brooked no argument. "On the porch or in the main room, just to be near if they need anything." The doctor and Sarah exchanged a glance that Katherine pretended not to notice. "That would be appropriate, Doctor." Johnson agreed carefully, given the circumstances. After the doctor and Sarah departed, a new kind of quiet settled over the cabin. Eliza had fallen asleep in Quentin's arms, her tiny face peaceful in repose. Katherine watched them together, this man and her daughter, and felt something shift within her heart, a realignment, a new possibility taking shape. "You should rest," Quentin said, reluctantly returning Eliza to her mother's arms. "The doctor was right about that." "I will," Katherine promised. "But Quentin, before you go—" "I'm not going anywhere," he interrupted gently. "I'll be right in the next room all night." Katherine shook her head. "That's not what I meant. I wanted to talk to you about your offer, about the ranch." Quentin went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Katherine, you don't need to think about that now, not today." "I think today is exactly when I need to think about it," she countered. Holding Eliza, seeing how fragile and perfect she is, it's made everything clearer. "How so?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Katherine looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at Quentin. "I want her to have a good life, a stable home, land to run on, people who love her." She took a deep breath. "I think Blackwater Ranch could be that home, and I think you could be one of those people." The hope that dawned in Quentin's eyes was like watching the sun rise. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," Katherine confirmed. "Yes to your offer, yes to bringing Eliza to the ranch, and yes to considering more in time." Quentin reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on Eliza's blanket. "I would never try to replace Thomas in your heart or in Eliza's life," he said solemnly. "But I promise you, Katherine, I will love this child as my own, and I will wait as long as you need for the rest." The simple sincerity of his promise brought fresh tears to Katherine's eyes. "I know you will," she whispered. "That's why I'm saying yes." In the quiet of the cabin, with her newborn daughter sleeping peacefully between them, Katherine felt the first real stirrings of hope for the future, a future different from the one she'd planned with Thomas, but no less filled with possibility. "Rest now," Quentin said, gently squeezing her hand before releasing it. "We'll talk more tomorrow." As he moved to leave the room, Katherine called after him softly. "Quentin!" He turned back, silhouetted in the doorway by the lamplight from the main room. "Thank you," she said simply. "For being there, for carrying me up those steps that day." His smile was gentle, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Best thing I ever did," he replied. "Now sleep. Both my girls need their rest." As Katherine drifted toward sleep, Eliza nestled securely against her. She found comfort in the knowledge that Quentin was just beyond the door, keeping watch. His words echoed in her mind, "both my girls," and she found herself smiling as sleep claimed her. They weren't a conventional family, not yet, but they were something with the potential to become one, and for now, that was enough. The first weeks of Eliza's life passed in a blur of exhaustion and wonder for Katherine. The tiny girl had a healthy set of lungs and definite opinions about when she should be fed, held, or changed. The demands of caring for a newborn left little time for reflection or planning, but Quentin's steady presence made everything more manageable. True to his word, he had stayed that first night, sleeping on the small sofa in Katherine's main room. In the days that followed, he divided his time between his ranch and Katherine's cabin, riding out at dawn to tend to his animals and returning by mid-morning to help with whatever was needed at Katherine's. Dr. Johnson visited regularly to check on mother and baby, each time departing with an approving nod at finding Quentin there. The town, predictably, buzzed with speculation about the arrangement, but Katherine found she had neither the energy nor the inclination to worry about gossip. Her world had narrowed to Eliza, Quentin, and the rhythm of days measured in feedings and brief naps. It was during one such quiet afternoon, with Eliza sleeping peacefully in the cradle Quentin had crafted for her, that they finally discussed the practicalities of moving to Blackwater Ranch. "The earliest we should move her is when she's a month old," Katherine said, watching Quentin repair a loose floorboard. "Dr. Johnson says she'll be stronger by then, better able to handle the journey." Quentin nodded, his hammer pausing mid-strike. "That gives us 2 more weeks to prepare. I've been working on the room across from mine, fresh paint, new curtains, and Mrs. Peterson helped me find a proper crib in Phoenix." The image of Quentin, who had lived alone for years, preparing a nursery for her daughter, brought a lump to Catherine's throat. "You didn't have to do all that." He shrugged, returning to his work. "Wanted to. Place has been too empty for too long." They worked out the details over the next several days, what furniture to bring from Catherine's cabin, what could be sold or left behind, how to transport everything safely. Quentin insisted on making multiple trips rather than trying to move everything at once, wanting to ensure Eliza's first journey was as comfortable as possible. As the day of the move approached, Katherine found herself experiencing unexpected pangs of nostalgia for the small cabin. It had been her home with Thomas, the place where she'd felt his presence most strongly after his death. Leaving it felt, in some ways, like saying a final goodbye. Quentin, with his uncanny ability to sense her moods, found her standing in the bedroom doorway the night before they were to leave, her gaze lingering on the bed where Eliza had been born. "We don't have to go tomorrow," he said quietly. "We can wait if you're not ready." Katherine shook her head, turning to face him. "No, it's time. It's just, there are memories here." "There will be memories at Blackwater too," he assured her, "different ones but no less important." She smiled at that, appreciating his understanding. "You're right. And Eliza deserves more than this small cabin can offer." "Eliza deserves the world," Quentin agreed, his gaze drifting to where the baby slept in her cradle. "I aim to give her as much of it as I can." The simple declaration, spoken without pretense or exaggeration, solidified Catherine's certainty that she was making the right decision. Quentin might not be Eliza's father by blood, but he already loved her with a depth that couldn't be questioned. The journey to Blackwater Ranch the next day was uneventful, much to Catherine's relief. Quentin had prepared the wagon with blankets and pillows, creating a nest for Katherine and Eliza that protected them from the worst of the bumps in the road. He drove slowly, choosing the smoothest path, his attention constantly shifting between the trail ahead and his precious cargo. When they crested the final hill and Blackwater Ranch came into view, Katherine felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. The house was larger than she remembered from her brief visit months ago, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. The barn and corrals stood a short distance away, and beyond them, the land stretched toward distant mountains, green with early October rains. "Home," Quentin said simply as he brought the wagon to a stop before the house. Katherine looked at him, finding his eyes on her rather than the familiar scenery. "Home," she echoed, the word feeling right on her tongue. The ranch hands 3 men Quentin had mentioned, but Katherine hadn't met appeared from the barn, curious about the arrival. Quentin introduced them with evident pride. Miguel, who had been with him since he bought the ranch, Samuel, a former soldier with a talent for breaking horses, and Daniel, the youngest at barely 20, who managed the vegetable gardens. "Mrs. Collins and Miss Eliza will be living here now," Quentin informed them, his tone making it clear this was cause for celebration rather than speculation. "I expect they'll be treated with the same respect you'd show your own mothers and sisters." The men nodded, solemn-faced but with genuine welcome in their eyes. Miguel, the oldest of the three, stepped forward with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "It will be good to have a family in the house again, Senora," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. "The place has been too quiet for too long." The simple acceptance in his words eased something in Catherine's chest. These men, who knew Quentin better than most, seemed unsurprised and untroubled by the unconventional arrangement. Quentin carried Eliza inside while the men helped Katherine down from the wagon, treating her with a careful deference that suggested they were well aware of her recent childbirth. Inside, the house was even more impressive than its exterior had suggested: spacious rooms with high ceilings, furniture that was sturdy but well crafted, windows that caught the afternoon light. "Your room is upstairs," Quentin said, leading the way. "I hope it suits you." The bedroom he had prepared for Katherine was larger than her entire cabin had been, with a 4-poster bed, a dressing table, and a rocking chair positioned near the window. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the nightstand, and the curtains were new, their fabric a soft blue that matched the quilt on the bed. "It's beautiful," Katherine said, genuinely touched by the care he'd taken. "Thank you." Quentin shifted Eliza in his arms, the baby still sleeping peacefully despite the journey and all the new surroundings. "The nursery is through here," he said, moving toward a connecting door. The nursery took Catherine's breath away. Quentin had indeed painted it a soft, buttery yellow that made the room glow in the afternoon sun. The promised crib stood in the center, its wood matching the rocking chair beside it. A small bookshelf already held several children's books, and a handmade mobile of carved wooden animals hung above the crib. "Quentin," Katherine breathed, unable to find words adequate to express her feelings. He misinterpreted her stunned silence as disapproval. "If there's anything you want changed—" "No," she interrupted, moving to his side to look down at Eliza's sleeping face. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." The relief in his expression was quickly replaced by quiet pride. "I wanted her first home to be special." "It is," Katherine assured him, her hand finding his arm and squeezing gently. "More than I could have imagined." That evening, after Eliza had been fed and settled in her new crib, Katherine joined Quentin on the porch. The October air had a hint of coolness, a welcome change after the summer's heat. They sat side by side in matching rocking chairs, watching as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Are you happy here?" Quentin asked, his voice carrying in the quiet evening. "Truly?" Katherine considered the question, not wanting to give a hasty answer. The day had been full of adjustments, of learning the layout of a new home, of understanding that this was now her life, this house, this land, this man beside her. "I am," she said finally, surprised to find it was entirely true. "It feels right being here, like something falling into place that I didn't know was misaligned." Quentin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been alone a long time," he said after a moment. "Convinced myself it was better that way after Abigail and the baby died. Safer." Katherine remained silent, sensing he needed to say these things without interruption. "Then I saw you on those steps that day," he continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Looking so determined despite being in pain, trying to manage on your own, and something shifted, like a bone that had been broken finally starting to heal." The poetry of his words, unexpected from a man usually so straightforward, touched Katherine deeply. "I felt it too," she admitted softly. "Not right away, perhaps, but as the weeks passed, and you kept coming back, kept helping without asking anything in return, I started to remember what it felt like to look forward to tomorrow." They fell silent again, the confession hanging in the air between them, neither quite ready to define what it meant but both acknowledging its significance. As darkness settled fully over the ranch, Quentin rose, offering Katherine his hand. "Come, I'll show you something." Curious, Katherine allowed him to lead her to the far end of the porch, where steps descended into what appeared to be a garden. In the moonlight she could make out the shapes of plants and shrubs, but little else. "What am I looking at?" she asked, peering into the shadows. Quentin struck a match, lighting a lantern hanging from a post. As the flame caught and grew, the garden was revealed not the practical vegetable plot she'd expected, but a flower garden, carefully tended and bursting with late-blooming varieties. "Abigail started it," Quentin explained, his voice low. "After she died, I couldn't bear to let it go, so I kept it up, added to it each year. Roses in the spring, sunflowers in summer, asters for fall." Katherine moved among the flowers, touching petals that were cool and slightly damp with evening dew. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "A living memorial." Quentin followed her, the lantern casting their shadows long across the garden path. "I used to come here to feel close to her, to remember. But lately," he paused as if searching for the right words. "Lately, I've found myself thinking of it differently, not just as a place of remembrance but of continuance, of life going on." Katherine understood what he was trying to say. "Thomas loved the sunrise," she said, offering her own piece of remembrance in exchange. "He would get up early just to watch the colors change. After he died, I couldn't bear to look at the sunrise for weeks. It hurt too much, reminded me too much of him." She turned to face Quentin, finding his eyes in the lantern light. "But one morning I woke early and found myself at the window anyway, and it was still beautiful, still worth seeing, even without him there to share it." Quentin nodded, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience. "I think," he said carefully, "that's how love works sometimes. It doesn't diminish what came before, it just makes room for what comes after." The simplicity and truth of his statement brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "that's exactly it." Quentin stepped closer, setting the lantern on a nearby bench. In the golden light, his face was both familiar and new, the lines of it softened by vulnerability. "Katherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not asking for anything, not yet. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. Not just for Eliza, but for you too." Katherine reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I know," she said simply, "and I'm grateful for that, for the time to find my way forward." His fingers tightened around hers, warm and steady. "We have all the time in the world." As they stood together in the garden, hands linked and silence comfortable between them, Katherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a good life nonetheless, one with the potential for joy, for growth, for love. And for now, that possibility was enough. The autumn days passed quickly at Blackwater Ranch, each one bringing subtle changes as Katherine and Eliza settled into their new home. Katherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the routine of caring for animals before oneself, the satisfaction of work completed by day's end. Eliza thrived in the spacious house, her cries echoing through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Quentin maintained his respectful distance, never pressing for more than Katherine was ready to give. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing meals, discussing the operations of the ranch, taking turns with Eliza when she was fussy. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the peaceful quiet as the stars appeared one by one above the mountains. It was during one such evening in late October, with Eliza sleeping soundly inside, that Katherine first noticed the approaching riders. Two men on horseback, moving steadily toward the ranch house from the direction of town. "Are you expecting anyone?" she asked Quentin, who had been whittling another small animal for Eliza's growing collection. He looked up, following her gaze, and frowned. "No, stay here." Katherine watched as he stood, tucking the carving and knife into his pocket and moving to the edge of the porch. His stance changed subtly, shoulders squaring, feet planting more firmly, hand resting near the gun he still wore even at home. As the riders drew closer, recognition dawned on Quentin's face. "It's Dr. Johnson," he called back to Katherine. "And Sheriff Davis." Katherine rose, curious about this unexpected visit. Dr. Johnson had checked on Eliza just days ago and pronounced her thriving. What would bring him and the sheriff out to the ranch at this hour? The men dismounted, tying their horses to the hitching post before approaching the porch. Both removed their hats as they drew near, a gesture of respect that immediately put Katherine on alert. Men removed their hats in the presence of ladies, yes, but also when delivering somber news. "Evening, Quentin, Mrs. Collins." Sheriff Davis greeted them, his weathered face serious beneath his graying mustache. "Sorry to disturb you so late." "Not at all," Quentin replied, though his posture remained watchful. "What brings you out this way?" Dr. Johnson and the sheriff exchanged a glance before the doctor spoke. "It's about Mr. Collins, Thomas Collins." Katherine felt her heart stutter. "Thomas, what about him?" The doctor's expression was gentle but grave. "Mrs. Collins, there's been a situation in town. A man arrived yesterday claiming to be Thomas Collins." The words made no sense to Katherine at first. "That's impossible," she said automatically. "Thomas died in our cabin. I was there." Sheriff Davis cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's just it, madam. According to this fella, he never lived in your cabin. Says he's been working mining claims near Prescott for the past year, and only just found out his name was being used by someone else." The implications of what they were saying began to sink in, leaving Katherine light-headed. "Are you suggesting my husband was an imposter? That he wasn't Thomas Collins?" "We don't know yet," Dr. Johnson said carefully. "The man does have documentation letters, a deed to some property near Tucson in the name of Thomas Collins, but he doesn't match the description of the man you were married to." Katherine sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "This makes no sense. Why would someone pretend to be Thomas Collins?" Quentin moved to her side, a steady presence when everything else seemed to be shifting beneath her feet. "What does this man want?" he asked the sheriff. "That's just it," Sheriff Davis replied. "He's not making any claims against Mrs. Collins or the baby. He just wants to clear his name, says he has business interests that could be affected if people think he died." "Then why come here tonight?" Quentin pressed. "This could have waited for morning, for a proper meeting in town." The two men exchanged another uncomfortable glance before Dr. Johnson spoke. "Because there's more. The man claiming to be Thomas Collins says he recognized the description of the man who died, Mrs. Collins. He believes it was a man named James Blackwood, wanted in Texas for fraud and worse." The name meant nothing to Katherine, but she saw Quentin stiffen beside her. "Blackwood," he repeated, his voice suddenly hard. "You're sure that's the name?" Sheriff Davis nodded grimly. According to Collins, the real Collins Blackwood was known for assuming other men's identities, using their good names to establish credit or gain trust, before disappearing with whatever he could steal. Katherine's mind raced, trying to reconcile this information with the man she had known as her husband. Thomas, or whoever he had been kind, charming, full of dreams for their future. He had never stolen from her, had left her what little money he had when he died. "This can't be right," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "The man I married wasn't a thief." Maybe not from you, Sheriff Davis allowed, but there are wanted posters that match his description. And the real Collins says Blackwood was known to form attachments to women, use them as cover for his operations. The suggestion that her marriage had been nothing more than a convenient cover for a criminal was too much. Katherine felt tears of anger and confusion well in her eyes. "You're wrong," she insisted. "He loved me. He was excited about the baby." Quentin's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Perhaps," he said to the men, his voice controlled but tight with anger, "you gentlemen could give Mrs. Collins some time to process this information. It's a lot to take in at once." Dr. Johnson nodded, clearly relieved at the suggestion. "Of course. We just thought you should know right away before rumors started spreading in town." "The man Collins, he's staying at the hotel," Sheriff Davis added. "Says he'll be in Fairview for a few days, in case Mrs. Collins wants to meet with him. Ask any questions." Katherine couldn't imagine facing this stranger who claimed her husband had been an imposter. Not yet, not when the very foundation of her life seemed to be crumbling beneath her feet. "Thank you for coming," Quentin said firmly, making it clear the conversation was over. "We'll be in touch if Mrs. Collins has any questions." After the men had departed, their horses kicking up dust in the gathering darkness, a heavy silence fell over the porch. Katherine sat motionless, her mind trying to process everything she'd just learned. "Katherine," Quentin began cautiously, "I know this is a shock." "A shock," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Finding out the man I loved, the father of my child, might have been a criminal using a false name. That's rather more than a shock, Quentin." He knelt before her chair, bringing himself to eye level. "I know, and I can't imagine how this feels. But Katherine, no matter who he was or what name he used, one thing is certain: he chose you. He stayed with you. Whatever else he might have been, he was Eliza's father." The simple truth of that statement penetrated Katherine's numbed mind. Yes, whoever he had been, he was still Eliza's father. That biological fact couldn't be erased by a change of name or revelations about his past. "What if it's true?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if everything was a lie? Our marriage, his love for me?" Quentin shook his head firmly. "A man can change his name, but not his heart. I didn't know him, but I know you, and you wouldn't have loved a man who wasn't worthy of it in some way." The certainty in his voice was a lifeline in a sea of doubt. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you," he repeated simply. "You see people for who they really are. If he was entirely bad, you would have sensed it." Katherine wanted desperately to believe him. The alternative, that she had been completely deceived, that her judgment was so flawed, was too painful to contemplate. "I need to think," she said finally. "I need time to make sense of this." Quentin nodded, rising to his feet. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk more." As he turned to go inside, Katherine caught his hand, stopping him. "Quentin, did you know this man, this Blackwood? You reacted to the name." A shadow crossed his face, and for a moment Katherine thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, turning back to face her fully. "I knew of him," he admitted. "Back in Texas after the war. He was known for charming his way into people's lives, gaining their trust, then disappearing with whatever he could take. He was clever, never stole enough from any one person to make it worth a serious pursuit, but enough from many to make himself comfortable. And you never mentioned this possibility when I told you about Thomas." "Because I had no reason to connect the two," Quentin explained. "The description you gave of your husband didn't match the Blackwood I'd heard about. And the man you described who loved you, who was excited about the baby, that didn't fit with the calculating criminal I'd heard of." Katherine nodded slowly, accepting his explanation. "I need to meet him," she said suddenly. "This man claiming to be Thomas Collins. I need to look him in the eye, ask him what he knows. "Are you sure?" Quentin asked, concern evident in his voice. "It could wait until you've had more time to think." "No," Katherine said firmly. "I need to know the truth, whatever it is, for Eliza's sake if not my own." Quentin studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "All right, we'll go to town tomorrow, together." The together lingered in the air between them, a promise that whatever came next, Katherine wouldn't face it alone. She nodded, squeezing his hand once before releasing it. "Together," she agreed. That night, as Katherine lay awake in her bed, Eliza sleeping peacefully in the nursery next door, she found herself re-examining every memory of her time with Thomas. Had there been signs she missed? Inconsistencies in his stories? Moments when he seemed other than the man she believed him to be? She remembered his charm, his easy way with people, his stories of places he'd been, and things he'd done. He'd been vague about his past sometimes, attributing it to painful memories of the war. She'd never pressed, believing that some wounds were best left undisturbed. And yet, he had been genuinely kind to her. Had nursed her through a bout of influenza their first winter together, had worked tirelessly on their small cabin to make it comfortable for her. When she told him about the baby, his joy had seemed real, his plans for their future sincere. Could such emotions be feigned? Could a man pretend love so convincingly as dawn broke over the mountains? Katherine was no closer to answers than she had been when the sheriff and doctor departed. But she was resolved to face whatever truth awaited her in town. For Eliza's sake, and for her own peace of mind, she needed to know who the man she had married truly was. After a quiet breakfast, during which Quentin respected her need for silence, they prepared for the journey to town. Katherine dressed with particular care, choosing her best dress and pinning her hair in a style that spoke of dignity rather than fashion. She wanted to face this man, whoever he was, with all the strength and composure she could muster. Quentin had arranged for Miguel's wife, Elena, to watch Eliza at the ranch. The baby was too young for such a journey, and Katherine was grateful for the thoughtfulness. This confrontation would be difficult enough without worrying about her daughter. The wagon ride to Fairview was tense, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the town, Katherine felt her resolve wavering. What if this man confirmed her worst fears? What if everything she had believed about her marriage was proved a lie? As if sensing her uncertainty, Quentin reached across the wagon seat, his hand covering hers. "Remember," he said quietly, "no matter what we learn today, it doesn't change who you are or who Eliza is." Katherine nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Thank you for coming with me." "Wouldn't be anywhere else," he replied simply. The town was relatively quiet when they arrived, the usual midday lull in activity as people sought shelter from the sun. Quentin drove directly to the sheriff's office, where they had arranged to meet the man claiming to be Thomas Collins. Sheriff Davis was waiting on the porch, his expression serious as he watched them approach. "Mrs. Collins, Mr. Lawson," he greeted them. "He's inside. Says he appreciates your willingness to meet with him." Katherine took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "Let's get this over with." Inside the office, a man stood by the window, turning as they entered. Katherine's first thought was one of relief. He looked nothing like her Thomas. This man was shorter, broader, with thinning red hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes spoke of modest success, not wealthy, but comfortable. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I understand how difficult this must be." Katherine studied him carefully. "You claim to be Thomas Collins," he nodded. "I am. I have documentation if you'd like to see it." He gestured to a stack of papers on the sheriff's desk. "Deeds, letters, my discharge papers from the Union Army." "The Union?" Katherine questioned. "My husband fought for the Confederacy." "I did not," the man said firmly. I served with the 14th New York Infantry. Fought at Gettysburg and Cold Harbor. The discrepancy was striking. Thomas had spoken of fighting under Lee, of the retreat from Gettysburg. Had those stories been lies as well, if you're Thomas Collins, Katherine said carefully, then who was the man I married? The man's expression softened with something like pity. Based on the description Sheriff Davis provided and the timing of his appearance in this area, I believe it was James Blackwood. He's wanted in several states for fraud, identity theft, and worse. Worse. Katherine pressed, needing to know everything, no matter how painful. The man Collins exchanged a glance with the sheriff before answering. There was a woman in St. Louis. She believed herself married to him too, under yet another name. When she discovered his deceptions, she confronted him. She was found dead the next day. The authorities ruled it suicide, but many had their doubts. Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. Quentin's hand was immediately at her elbow, steadying her. That's enough, he said sharply. You've made your point. Collins raised his hands apologetically. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cause more pain, but Mrs. Collins asked for the truth. And how do you know all this? Katherine demanded, finding her voice again. How are you so familiar with this man's crimes? Because he stole my identity once before, Collins explained. 3 years ago in Kansas City. Used my name to secure loans, left debts in my name. It took me months to clear my reputation. When I heard rumors of a Thomas Collins in Arizona Territory, I had to investigate. The story was plausible, Katherine had to admit, but something still didn't feel right. If the man I knew was this criminal, why did he stay with me? Why not disappear after he got what he wanted? Collins hesitated, looking uncomfortable. I can't pretend to understand the mind of a man like Blackwood. Perhaps he genuinely cared for you, or perhaps he saw value in establishing a respectable appearance in a new territory. He died, Katherine said flatly. If he was the calculating criminal you describe, why not simply leave when he tired of the deception? Why stay until illness claimed him? I don't have all the answers, Mrs. Collins, Collins admitted. I only know what I know about the man and who I am. Katherine turned to Sheriff Davis. You've seen the wanted posters for this Blackwood. Did they match my husband's description? The sheriff nodded reluctantly. Generally, yes. Tall, dark-haired, blue eyes, a scar on his right hand from a knife wound. The scar, Katherine had almost forgotten that detail. Thomas had a thin white scar across the back of his right hand, which he'd claimed came from a bayonet during the war. One more lie, it seemed. May I ask, Collins said carefully, if he left you with any debts, any financial obligations in my name? The question, practical though it was, struck Katherine as callous after everything else that had been discussed. No, she said coldly. He left me with nothing but a small amount of money and a child to raise alone. Collins had the grace to look abashed. I apologize. I didn't mean to imply. That is, I'm relieved he didn't leave you in financial difficulty. If there's nothing else, Quentin interjected, his protective instincts clearly engaged, I think Mrs. Collins has heard enough for today. Sheriff Davis nodded. Of course, Mr. Collins will be in town for 2 more days if you have any further questions, Mrs. Collins. Katherine doubted she would. What more could this stranger tell her that would make sense of the confusion and hurt she was feeling? Thank you for your time, she said formally, turning to leave. Outside in the bright sunlight, Katherine felt disoriented, as if the world had shifted on its axis while she wasn't looking. Quentin led her to a bench in the shade of the general store, giving her a moment to collect herself before they returned to the ranch. Are you all right? He asked quietly, sitting beside her. I don't know, Katherine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel as if I never knew him at all. Quentin was silent for a moment, considering his words carefully. Perhaps you knew the man he wanted to be rather than the man he was. The insight startled Katherine with its perception. What do you mean? Some men spend their whole lives running from who they are, Quentin explained. Maybe with you for a time he stopped running, became someone better than he had been. It was a comforting thought that the man she had loved, whoever he truly was, had been his best self with her. That the kindness and care he had shown weren't entirely fabrications, but glimpses of the person he might have been under different circumstances. I want to believe that, she said softly. For Eliza's sake, if nothing else. Quentin nodded, understanding as always. Then believe it. No one can tell you what was in his heart, Katherine. Not Collins, not the sheriff, not anyone. Only you knew him in the way that matters. Katherine looked at Quentin, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time, who had offered support without judgment, comfort without pressure, who truly saw her in a way perhaps no one else ever had. Take me home, she said suddenly, the word home slipping out naturally. I want to see Eliza. Quentin smiled, rising and offering his hand. Home it is. As they drove back to Blackwater Ranch, Katherine felt a strange sense of lightness despite the weight of everything she had learned. The truth about Thomas or James, or whoever he had been, didn't change the fact that he had given her Eliza, didn't erase the moments of genuine happiness they had shared. And it certainly didn't diminish the life she was building now, with Quentin and her daughter on the ranch that was becoming more like home with each passing day. The man she had married might have been living a lie, but Katherine's love for her daughter and her growing feelings for Quentin were undeniably real. And perhaps, she thought as the ranch came into view, that was the only truth that truly mattered. Winter came early to the Arizona territory that year, bringing with it a crispness to the air and occasional dustings of snow that melted by midday. As November gave way to December, life at Blackwater Ranch settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural to Katherine. Eliza, now nearly 3 months old, was thriving, her cheeks round and rosy, her dark eyes alert and curious about the world around her. She had Thomas's eyes, Katherine realized with a pang. Whoever he had truly been, he lived on in their daughter. The revelations about her husband's identity had been difficult to process, but as the weeks passed, Katherine found herself focusing less on the lies of the past and more on the truths of the present. And the most important truth was that she and Eliza were building a new life at Blackwater Ranch, a good life, filled with the promise of happiness she had once thought lost forever. Quentin had been her anchor through it all, never pressing for more than she was ready to give, but always present, always supportive. Their relationship had deepened into something that defied simple definition, more than friendship. Not quite courtship, but moving steadily in that direction with each passing day. It was on a clear December morning, with frost silvering the grass and the distant mountains sharp against the blue sky, that Quentin approached Katherine with an unexpected proposal. "I'm riding into Fairview today," he said as they finished breakfast, Eliza contentedly nestled in Katherine's arms. "Would you and Eliza like to come along? The fresh air would do you both good." Katherine hesitated. She hadn't been to town since the meeting with the real Thomas Collins, partly by choice and partly because winter weather had made travel less appealing. "What's the occasion?" "Christmas is coming," Quentin reminded her with a small smile. "Thought we might want to get some things for the house. Make it special for Eliza's first Christmas." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion touched Katherine deeply. "She's too young to remember it," she pointed out, though her tone was warm rather than discouraging. "Maybe," Quentin agreed, "but we'll remember, and it's about traditions, isn't it? Starting as we mean to go on." The phrase caught Katherine's attention. There was something in the way he said it, a quiet certainty, a looking forward rather than back, that made her heart beat a little faster. "Yes," she said, smiling up at him. "Let's go to town." The journey was pleasant despite the cold, with Eliza bundled in blankets and nestled securely between them in the wagon. Katherine found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of the outing, of being out in the world with Quentin and her daughter, the three of them together like any family might be. Fairview was transformed for the holiday season, with evergreen boughs decorating the storefronts and red ribbons brightening the usually plain exteriors. The general store had expanded its inventory for the occasion, offering toys and decorations alongside the usual practical goods. As they entered the store, Katherine was aware of curious glances from the other customers. News of her husband's true identity had spread through town, of course, but so had the news of her new living arrangement at Blackwater Ranch. She braced herself for judgment or pity, but found instead a general atmosphere of acceptance, even approval. Mrs. Peterson appeared from behind a display of candies, her face lighting up at the sight of them. "Katherine, and the baby, my goodness, how she's grown, may I?" She held out her arms hopefully. Katherine smiled, carefully transferring Eliza to the older woman's eager embrace. Mrs. Peterson cooed and fussed over the baby, who regarded her with solemn interest. "She's the very picture of health," Mrs. Peterson declared. "Blackwater Ranch must agree with both of you." "It does," Katherine confirmed, glancing at Quentin, who was pretending to examine a display of pocket knives but clearly listening to every word. "We've settled in well." Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And Mr. Lawson?" "He's treating you both properly." Katherine felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Very properly," she assured the older woman. "He's been everything one could hope for in a friend." The knowing look Mrs. Peterson gave her suggested she heard the hesitation before the word friend, but she merely nodded, returning her attention to Eliza. "Well, this little one deserves the best Christmas possible. Have you seen the lovely wooden toys Mr. Swenson has carved, perfect for when she's a bit older?" They spent a pleasant hour in the store, selecting simple decorations for the ranch house and a few small gifts. Quentin insisted on buying a tiny silver bracelet for Eliza, to be saved for when she was older, and Katherine found herself touched by his thoughtfulness. As they were preparing to leave, Dr. Johnson entered the store, his face brightening when he spotted them. "Mrs. Collins, Mr. Lawson, and little Eliza, what a pleasant surprise." After inquiring about Eliza's health and pronouncing himself satisfied with Katherine's report, the doctor hesitated, glancing between them with an expression Katherine couldn't quite interpret. "Is something wrong, doctor?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "Not at all," he assured her quickly. Well, there's been some discussion in town about your situation." Katherine felt herself stiffen. "Our situation?" Dr. Johnson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your living arrangement at Blackwater Ranch. I assure you, most people understand the practicality of it, especially with winter setting in. But there are some who concern themselves with matters of propriety." Quentin's expression darkened. "Has someone been speaking against Mrs. Collins?" No, the doctor hastened to add. "It's more suggestions that perhaps the arrangement could be formalized, for the sake of appearances, if nothing else." Katherine felt heat rise to her face as she realized what the doctor was delicately suggesting: marriage. The town was expecting, perhaps even hoping for, a marriage between her and Quentin. "I appreciate the town's concern for our moral well-being," Quentin said, his voice carefully controlled. "But Mrs. Collins and I will make such decisions in our own time, based on our own feelings, not town gossip." Dr. Johnson nodded quickly. Of course, I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just, well, people care about you both, want to see things settled properly. Things are settled properly, Katherine said with more confidence than she felt. Mr. Lawson has been a perfect gentleman, and I won't have anyone suggesting otherwise. The doctor raised his hands in a placating gesture. No one is suggesting impropriety, Mrs. Collins. Quite the opposite. The town sees how well you suit each other, that's all. Before either of them could respond to this surprisingly direct statement, Eliza began to fuss, saving them from further awkwardness. Katherine took her daughter back from Mrs. Peterson, who had been quietly listening to the exchange with undisguised interest. "We should head back," Quentin said, gathering their purchases. "It looks like snow might be coming in." The ride home was quieter than the journey into town, both of them processing the doctor's well-intentioned but uncomfortable intervention. It wasn't until they were halfway back to the ranch that Quentin finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry about that," he said, his eyes on the road ahead. "The doctor had no business speaking to you that way." "He meant well," Katherine replied, though she was still somewhat embarrassed by the encounter. "And he's not wrong about how it might appear to others." Quentin glanced at her, his expression serious. "Do you care how it appears?" It was a direct question, deserving a direct answer. "No," Katherine said after a moment's thought. "I don't. Not anymore, but I do care about Eliza, about what people might say to her or about her as she grows up." Quentin nodded, understanding. "That's fair." He was quiet for another moment before adding, "I meant what I said before. About making such decisions in our own time, based on our own feelings, not external pressure." Katherine studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. "And what are your feelings, Quentin?" The directness of the question seemed to surprise him. He slowed the wagon, turning to look at her fully. "I think you know," he said quietly. "I care for you, Katherine, more than I thought possible after Abigail, and I love Eliza as if she were my own." The simple honesty of his declaration touched Katherine deeply. "I care for you too," she admitted. "But I'm still finding my way. After everything that happened with Thomas or whoever he was, I need to be sure, for Eliza's sake and for my own." "I understand," Quentin assured her, "and I'm not going anywhere. We have time." As they continued toward home, snow began to fall softly around them, dusting the landscape in white. Eliza reached up from her blankets, trying to catch the flakes that drifted into the wagon. "Look at that," Quentin said, smiling at the baby's wonder. "Her first snow." Katherine watched her daughter's fascination with the falling flakes, then looked up to find Quentin watching them both, his expression so full of love it made her breath catch. In that moment, with snow falling gently around them and Eliza's small hand reaching for the sky, Katherine felt something settle within her, a certainty, a rightness. This was her family now. Different from what she had imagined, formed through circumstances she could never have predicted, but no less real for all that. Quentin and Eliza, the ranch, the life they were building together, this was home. This was where she belonged. The realization brought with it a profound sense of peace. Whatever came next, whatever decisions they made about their future together, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Christmas at Blackwater Ranch was unlike any holiday Katherine had experienced before. The house was transformed with the simple decorations they had selected in town: evergreen boughs on the mantel, red ribbons on the stair railings, candles in the windows to welcome the season. Quentin had cut a small pine tree from their land and set it up in the parlor, where it filled the room with its fresh, resinous scent. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside the windows, Katherine sat in the parlor with Eliza in her arms, watching as Quentin added the final touches to the tree. He had crafted small wooden ornaments, stars and angels and tiny animals that caught the light of the candles he carefully positioned among the branches. "It's beautiful," Katherine said softly as he stepped back to survey his work. Quentin turned to her, his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw, the usual vigilance in his eyes replaced by simple contentment. "My mother always said a home needs a Christmas tree, something about bringing life and light into the darkest time of year." She was right, Katherine agreed, looking around the room that glowed with warmth and welcome. "This feels like Christmas should feel." Quentin settled into the chair opposite hers, his gaze moving from the tree to Katherine and Eliza. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "For both of you, actually, but I wanted to give it to you tonight, just the three of us." Katherine watched curiously as he produced a small wooden box, simply made but beautifully polished. "Quentin, you didn't need to, I wanted to," he interrupted gently, extending the box toward her. "Open it." Shifting Eliza to one arm, Katherine accepted the box, lifting the lid carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a heart-shaped locket, its surface engraved with intertwining vines. "It's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box to examine it more closely. "Open it," Quentin encouraged, his voice soft with anticipation. Katherine did, her fingers finding the tiny clasp. The locket swung open to reveal two miniature portraits on one side, a perfect likeness of Eliza, captured in her peaceful sleep, on the other, to Katherine's surprise, a portrait of Quentin himself, his expression serious but his eyes warm. "How did you?" Katherine began, wondering how he had managed such a thing without her knowledge. "Mrs. Peterson has a nephew who's a photographer in Phoenix," Quentin explained. "I took Eliza to town one day when you were resting. As for my portrait, well, that was done years ago. I sent it to him and asked if he could make it small enough for the locket." Katherine was deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Quentin leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "I wanted you to have something that represents what matters most, what I hope we're building here together." The implication was clear. Quentin was offering not just a gift, but a future. A family, with him as husband and father, Katherine as wife and mother, Eliza as the child they would raise together. "Help me put it on," Katherine asked, holding the locket out to him. Quentin moved to kneel beside her chair, taking the delicate chain in his large hands. With surprising dexterity, he fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin in a touch that sent warmth spreading through her. When he would have moved away, Katherine caught his hand, holding him there. "Quentin," she said softly, "I have something for you too. Not a gift you can hold, but something I hope you'll value just as much." He remained kneeling beside her, his hand warm in hers, waiting. "An answer," Katherine continued, her heart beating faster as she committed to the words. "To the question you haven't quite asked yet, but that's been between us all these months." Understanding dawned in Quentin's eyes, hope and caution warring in his expression. "Katherine, you don't have to—" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "Yes, I'll marry you if that's still what you want." The joy that transformed Quentin's face was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway, his voice rough with emotion. "It's what I want more than anything in this world." He leaned forward, one hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness, and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful of the baby in her arms, but filled with promise and a depth of feeling that took Katherine's breath away. When they parted, Quentin rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "When?" he asked simply. Katherine smiled, her free hand finding the locket at her throat. "Soon," she promised. "After the new year, No need to wait any longer than that, Quentin nodded, opening his eyes to gaze at her with such love it made her heart ache. A new year, a new beginning. For all of us, Katherine agreed, looking down at Eliza, who had slept peacefully through this life-changing exchange. As if sensing she was the subject of discussion, Eliza opened her eyes, blinking up at them both. Quentin reached out, his finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. Eliza caught his finger in her tiny fist, holding on with surprising strength. "Look at that," Quentin said, his voice filled with wonder. "She knows," Katherine laughed softly. "Knows what?" "That we're her family now," Quentin replied simply. "That she belongs with us and we belong with her." The truth of his words settled over Katherine like a blessing. This was what family meant, not just blood or legal bonds, but choice. The daily decision to love, to protect, to build something lasting together. As snow continued to fall outside, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse, the three of them remained in the warm glow of the Christmas tree, a man, a woman, and a child, forming a family circle that felt as ancient and sacred as the holiday itself. "Merry Christmas, Quentin," Katherine whispered. "Merry Christmas, my love," he returned, the endearment falling naturally from his lips. The first of many. And in that moment, Katherine believed him with her whole heart. New Year's Day, 1877, dawned clear and cold over Blackwater Ranch. The snow that had fallen throughout the week between Christmas and New Year's Eve still blanketed the land, gleaming in the early morning sunlight like a fresh page waiting to be written upon. It seemed fitting, Katherine thought as she stood at her bedroom window, that they would begin their marriage on such a day that symbolized new beginnings, fresh starts, the leaving behind of the old and the embracing of the new. She turned from the window as a soft knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Elena, who had offered to help her dress for the ceremony. Instead, it was Sarah Johnson who entered, carrying a large box. "Good morning, bride," she greeted Katherine with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I have something for you." Katherine welcomed her friend with a hug. "Not an intrusion at all. But what's this?" Sarah set the box on the bed, lifting the lid to reveal a dress of pale blue silk, its simple lines enhanced by delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "It was my sister's wedding dress," she explained. "She sent it when I wrote to tell her about you and Quentin. Said it should be worn by someone in love, not packed away in a trunk." Katherine touched the fabric reverently. "Sarah, it's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Consider it a gift from all the women of Fairview. We're so happy for you both." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gesture. With Sarah's help, Katherine dressed in the beautiful gown, which fit as if it had been made for her. Her hair, longer now than she had worn it in years, was arranged in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, with a few soft curls framing her face. "There," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Quentin won't know what hit him." Katherine laughed, some of her nervousness dissipating. "Is he here yet?" "Arrived an hour ago with the men, looking more nervous than I've ever seen him," Sarah confirmed with a grin. "Dr. Johnson is keeping him occupied, making sure he doesn't try to sneak a peek at the bride before it's time." The wedding was to be held in the Blackwater Ranch parlor, with only a small group of friends in attendance. Dr. and Mrs. Johnson, Sheriff Davis, Mrs. Peterson, and the ranch hands who had become like family over the past months. Judge Porter had ridden out from Fairview to perform the ceremony, his presence lending official sanction to what everyone already felt was a natural and right union. Elena appeared at the door, Eliza in her arms, dressed in a tiny white gown that Katherine had sewn herself. "The baby is ready," she announced, "and so is everyone else. They are waiting for you downstairs." Katherine took a deep breath, accepting her daughter from Alina's arms. "Then I suppose we shouldn't keep them waiting any longer." The stairs had been decorated with evergreen boughs and white ribbons, creating a festive aisle for Katherine's descent. As she reached the top step, Eliza secure in her arms, the soft strains of music drifted up from below, someone playing a fiddle, the sweet notes filling the house with joy. With Sarah leading the way and Alina following, Katherine began her descent. Each step brought her closer to the future she had chosen, to the man who had carried her up a different set of stairs so many months ago and in doing so had carried her into a new life. When she reached the bottom of the staircase and turned toward the parlor, Katherine's breath caught at the sight that greeted her. The room was transformed with flowers, how Quentin had managed to find so many in the dead of winter. She couldn't imagine, and candles that cast a golden glow over the assembled guests. And there, standing before the fireplace with Judge Porter, was Quentin. He wore a new suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression when he saw her that Katherine would remember for the rest of her life, a look of such wonder and love that it felt like a physical touch across the room. The music faded as Katherine walked toward him, carrying their future in her arms. When she reached his side, Quentin's hand found hers, warm and steady. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," she returned with a smile, meaning it more than she could express. Judge Porter cleared his throat, bringing their attention back to the ceremony. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Quentin Lawson and Katherine Collins, who have found in each other a love that transcends the ordinary and creates something extraordinary, a family." The words resonated deeply with Katherine. That was exactly what they had done, created a family from disparate parts, from loss and hope and the courage to begin again. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with vows that spoke of partnership, respect, and unwavering commitment. When Judge Porter pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of all that was to come. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed, with food prepared by Alina and the other women, music provided by Miguel and Samuel on fiddle and guitar, and enough goodwill to warm the coldest January day. As the afternoon progressed, Katherine found a quiet moment to slip away to the porch, needing a brief respite from the happy commotion. She stood at the railing, looking out over the snow-covered land that was now legally hers as well as Quentin's, feeling a profound sense of belonging. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Quentin. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her back against his chest as he rested his chin on top of her head. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "More than I can say," she replied honestly, covering his hands with her own. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. "I have a confession to make," Quentin said finally, his voice holding a note of hesitation that made Katherine turn in his arms to look up at him. "What is it?" He met her gaze directly, as he always did. "That day at the doctor's office when I carried you up the steps." "It wasn't the first time I'd seen you." Katherine's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'd seen you in town before," he admitted. "Several times, shopping, walking home. I noticed you, how could I not? But I never had the courage to approach you. Then that day, seeing you struggling with the steps, it felt like fate giving me a chance I might not get again." The revelation surprised Katherine. The thought of Quentin watching her from afar, noticing her before she ever knew he existed, was both strange and oddly touching. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked. Quentin shrugged, a hint of self-consciousness in the gesture. "Didn't want you to think I was some kind of lurker, and then, after we started spending time together, it didn't seem important anymore." Katherine smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Well, I'm glad fate gave you that chance, and that you took it." He turned his head to kiss her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you, Katherine Lawson." The new name sent a thrill through her. "I love you too, Quentin Lawson." The sound of Eliza's cry from inside the house broke the moment, but neither of them minded. It was, after all, the sound of their future calling. "Shall we?" Quentin asked, offering his arm. Katherine slipped her hand through it, leaning into his solid strength. "Let's go tend to our daughter." Together, they returned to the warmth of their home and the celebration of their union, surrounded by friends who had become family and a future bright with promise. Epilogue: Spring 1880. The wildflowers carpeted the rolling hills of Blackwater Ranch in a riot of color: purple lupines, golden poppies, blue flax dancing in the gentle April breeze. Katherine watched from the wide front porch as Quentin led a tiny figure on an equally tiny pony in careful circles around the corral. "Keep your heels down, Eliza," his deep voice carried on the wind. "That's my girl. You're a natural." At 4 years old, Eliza was fearless and determined, qualities that both delighted and terrified her parents in equal measure. Her dark hair, so like her biological father's, was pulled into 2 braids that bounced with every movement of the pony. But it was her laugh, bright and uninhibited, that was pure Eliza, a sound that never failed to bring joy to everyone who heard it. "Mama, look," she called, spotting Katherine on the porch. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," Katherine called back, waving. "You're doing wonderfully." Beside Katherine, in a sturdy wooden cradle, 3-month-old Joshua Lawson stirred in his sleep, tiny fists waving briefly, before settling back into dreams. Katherine rocked the cradle gently with her foot, marveling as she always did at the perfect miniature features that so resembled his father's. The past 3 years had brought changes to Blackwater Ranch, a new wing added to the house, more cattle, horses bred specifically for their quality rather than just utility. The small ranch had grown into a prosperous operation, respected throughout the territory for its fine stock and fair dealings. But the most important changes weren't visible in buildings or livestock. They were in the relationships that had deepened and strengthened with time. Katherine and Quentin's marriage, solid as the mountains that framed their land. Eliza's unwavering confidence in her place in the world, secure in the love of both her parents. The sense of family that extended beyond blood to include the ranch hands, the Johnsons, Mrs. Peterson, and all who had supported them from the beginning. Katherine's hand went to the locket she still wore every day, its familiar weight a comfort against her skin. Inside were new portraits, now Eliza on one side, Joshua on the other. But she kept the originals in a special box, a reminder of where they had begun and how far they had come. In the corral, Quentin lifted Eliza from the pony, swinging her high in the air before setting her on his shoulders. Together they walked toward the house, Eliza's small hands tangled in her father's hair, her face alight with happiness. As Katherine watched them approach, she felt the now familiar swell of gratitude that had become the backdrop of her daily life. This was what second chances looked like: a man who had lost his family finding the courage to love again. A woman who had been deceived discovering that truth came in many forms. A child who might have grown up without a father instead blessed with one who chose her, who loved her without reservation or condition. "How's our boy?" Quentin asked as he climbed the porch steps, Eliza still perched on his shoulders. "Sleeping like an angel," Katherine replied, reaching up to help Eliza down. "Unlike his sister at that age." Eliza giggled, kneeling beside the cradle to peer at her brother. "I was just excited to see everything," she defended herself. "Joshua's too lazy." "He'll have plenty of time to see the world," Quentin assured her, dropping a kiss on top of her head before leaning down to kiss Katherine properly. "He's got his whole life ahead of him. We all do." Katherine leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him, the scent of leather and horses and home that clung to his clothes. "Yes," she agreed, looking out over the land that had become their sanctuary and their future. A whole life together. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch, the Lawson family remained on the porch Quentin, and Katherine side by side in the rocking chairs he had made, Eliza playing quietly with her wooden animals on the planked floor, baby Joshua sleeping peacefully in his cradle. It wasn't the life Katherine had imagined for herself when she'd first come west with Thomas, full of dreams and expectations. It was something different, something unexpected, a life built not on illusions or deceptions, but on choice and truth and the daily decision to love. And it was, Katherine reflected as Quentin's hand found hers in the gathering twilight, infinitely better than anything she could have planned.